are back for yet another interview at the APOR conference with Scott Keeter, who is a name familiar to pollster.com readers. You're the Director of Survey Research at the Pew Research Center, and someone that we've come back to again and again on the subject of cell phones. Scott did a paper today on just general methodological challenges to political polling last year. So Scott, just if you can, in a minute or so, what was the bottom line of what you found?
Well, I think everybody's familiar with the two big challenges. The cell phone problem, we're at the point of having 1 out of 5 households not reachable by landline phones. And then there was the question of whether there was going to be some kind of Bradley effect or Wilder effect in the election, with the first African-American candidate for president, nominee of the general election party. And so we had to deal with those challenges. And the bottom line is, polling did very well. The average error for national polls was about 1 percentage point, a better performance even than 2004, which itself was quite good. But even below the national level, polling did pretty well. State level errors were somewhat higher, 1.5, 1.6% at the presidential level, a little bit higher if you take into account races for Senate and governor, but the track record was quite good.
Okay, let me drill down a little specifically on that. You in your presentation looked at how national surveys and state surveys that had a cell phone interviewing component fared against those that did not. I know that's an area that you warned us all about in August of last year, that leaving out cell phone only respondents might matter. Can you summarize that?
Yeah. I mean, we found that dual frame surveys at the national level, that is ones that included cell phones, did slightly better than those that did not. The average error differences we're talking about just a couple of tenths of a percentage point, but they were there. And that mirrored what we found in our own polls, where we compared the landline part of our samples, weighted as if that's the only part of the survey we had done, against the dual frame samples, and we found relatively consistent pro-Republican bias in the ones that didn't include cell phones. But we're talking about differences on the order of 2 or 3 percentage points. Small differences didn't matter in this election, but they might have mattered if the election had been closer. At the state level, there are a couple of interesting findings. One of them is that the errors, since we assume that almost all of the state surveys were landline surveys, the question would be, was there any evidence of a Republican bias in them because they didn't include the cell phones and reach the kind of people that we know are a little more Democratic? And the answer is that the average errors in a Republican or Democratic direction were pretty much the same, but about 50% more surveys had errors in a Republican direction than in a Democratic direction. Again, it's a small thing, but the consistency of it suggests that there may have been a slight Republican bias in the landline-only sampling frames.
Okay. This raises a question that I've asked some other folks, and that we sort of see over and over again. On the one hand, I think most of us here are trained that methods matter, that the steps we go to try to get a representative sample are important. And yet when we do look at predictive accuracy, when we look at these scores, sometimes it's gratifying, I think, that you found evidence that interviewing on cell phones matters. But it's hard to find evidence. There's a paper today showing that calling repeatedly doesn't seem to be related. What do we make of that? How do we resolve that apparent contradiction?
Well, it seems like a good thing for us, given the kinds of fears that we've had about the accuracy in this election and how high the stakes are, and more generally just how high the stakes are for polling in general in elections, because if we get something really badly wrong, I think it calls into question all survey research and not just election polling. But I think it's important to keep in mind that predictive accuracy is not the only measure of the value of surveys. Some of it comes from the depth of the analysis that you can do. For example, IVR polls, so-called robopolls, seem to have the same predictive accuracy as ones that use live interviewers. But robopolls can't be very long. They can't get into a lot of depth, and so they can't tell us very much about why people are doing what they're doing. It also may be the case that polls that don't have the same methodological rigor have more trouble with races where the candidates are not well known, where there's more opportunity for variability, among respondents. We don't have much evidence about that, but it's certainly a reasonable hypothesis.
Okay, well, that is very helpful. Thank you for sharing your time with us, Scott.
Good to be with you.